Let's talk about the best way to submit your work to an illustration agency. The blog post I wrote on submitting work to an illustration agency is without a doubt the most successful thing I've ever written. And as a personal achievement, that's probably a bit depressing, but it tells me a lot about the industry. There are tens of thousands of illustrators out there that are looking to be represented by an agency. That means there is a lot of competition. And hopefully most of the people that have read that post are submitting their work to agencies the right way. But I also know how many submissions I see that are still submitted incorrectly, in a lazy, unprofessional, or clumsy way. If your work is submitted to an agency in the wrong way, a lot of the time it will simply not be considered because you haven't followed the instructions. The amount of submissions an agency receives is enormous, and the agents have got to figure out a way to make that manageable. So if they can cut their to-do list in half by removing all the incorrect submissions, they might just do that. The right kind of artist submission for me is one that is quick to scan through. A short message, a couple of images, and a link to see more if I want to. Regardless of whether or not I like the work, I will look at an email from an artist that has submitted their work the right way. Short, polite, and simple is the right way for me and my agency, but every agency has different guidelines that they want you to follow. What works for one agency won't work for all of them. When I wrote that blog post listing several different agencies and their submission guidelines, I knew it would be popular because it saves artists a lot of time doing the research, but I also like to think it means that more artists are being given fair consideration from the agencies on that list because they're submitting their work the right way. It's important to remember that agencies want to see new submissions. They couldn't survive without new talent. We welcome submissions from artists, but a lot of agencies are probably smaller operations than you might think, and time is limited, so we need to be able to look at new work in the most convenient way, and that's different for every agency. If at any point you find yourself writing one email application to send to several different agencies, please stop, because you're wasting your time. By doing that, you are only showing those agencies that you don't respect their time and that you haven't done your research. I still very occasionally see a submission that has all the other agencies clearly CC'd into the email. And what would you think if you got that email? That artist doesn't want to work with me or my agency. They're just sending a lazy blanket email without any thought or research. It doesn't make me feel very special. The good news is, if you've made this mistake in the past, it doesn't really matter. Nobody's going to remember a couple of months down the line. You've probably delayed the possibility of you getting an agent by a few months, but you get many, many opportunities to make a first impression with an agency. If your first impression wasn't that great, wait a few months and you can make your second first impression the right way. The first one will be forgotten about pretty quickly. I can't think of an illustration agency that doesn't have their submission guidelines on their website. They're not always easy to find, but they are definitely there. It's not the agency's responsibility to make it as easy as possible for you to submit your work. It's your responsibility to make it as easy as possible for the agency to see your work. Sometimes I'll see an email from an artist asking how they should submit their work, or saying that they couldn't find the submission guidelines. I know that they're very clearly stated on the website, so in this situation, the artist is asking me to do the work for them instead of doing the research themselves. And I don't reply to those emails. Not to be mean, but I don't need another thing to add to my to-do list. It shouldn't take longer than a couple of minutes to find the submission guidelines on any agency website. Let's take a look through a couple right now and you can see how easy it really is. All right, let's pick a random agency here, Rush. Now, if an agency doesn't have a specific submissions link on their front page, I'm usually going to go to the contact page. Right there, easy. Let's try another. The artworks. Contact us. Another easy one. Submission guidelines right there. Jackie Winter. That's annoying. All right, finally. Want to submit your folio? Read this. Okay, so Jackie Winter have quite specific guidelines here that you can read through. Also, some frequently asked questions. Illustration X. These guys do it a little bit differently, if I remember rightly. Artist applications. Okay, yeah, so they've got a web form. They don't want to receive emails from you with your work. So there's just a form to fill in here with a few questions about you and your work. Lemonade Illustration. Again, I'll go to Contact. Artist submission information. All right, I mean, this one gets into some real detail there. Good to know, though. Handsome Frank. Contact. Yeah, okay, I mean, it's kind of hidden away here, but they have some specific submission guidelines. And finally, JSR. Contact again. Looking for representation. Now this is quite a brief instruction. Submit your work and a little bit about your experience and why you're seeking representation. So that took no time at all to go through 6 or 7 agencies. It doesn't really count as research, it's just reading. The agencies with specific requirements are easier in a way because you just follow the instructions. For the ones with a more general, breezy attitude, there are still a few things that you should consider. Send web quality images by email. You shouldn't be sending 300 dpi images through an email because the file sizes will be massive. That doesn't mean they should be low quality and pixelated though, it just means they should be optimized for email. Introduce yourself. Agencies don't need a life story, a few sentences is enough. You have to write something though, so the agency can see how you communicate, or if you can communicate at all. Be polite. You shouldn't be groveling or begging, but you shouldn't be arrogant either. Just be friendly. Illustration is generally an informal industry, but keep your first contact professional, to the point, and check your spelling. If there is a language barrier, just do your best. Google Translate is your friend there. Nobody's going to hold it against you if there is a language barrier. Feel free to send a client list, but an agent probably doesn't need a resume or a CV. It doesn't really matter what your work history is if your illustrations are good. Personalize your email to the specific agency. It takes 5 minutes to write an email. There's really no good reason why you should be writing the same email and sending it to lots of different agencies. Look at the other artists represented by the agency. If your work is very similar to one of the other artists on there, it's unlikely the agency will be able to take you on. That doesn't mean you shouldn't apply necessarily, but it is something you should consider. Make it as easy as possible for the agency to see more of your work if they want to. Add a link to your website and add a link to your social media. Don't send zip files or Google Drive links to downloadable portfolios. You're adding an extra barrier between you and the person looking at it. They can't avoid looking at an image in an email because it's right there, but they might not click the link. I don't download anything from an email that I don't recognize. Even if your work isn't right for the agency, if you follow the instructions and submit your work the right way, it will be looked at. And if you don't hear anything back, it's nothing personal. Your work might not be a good fit for the agency at that time. That shouldn't stop you trying again in 6 months and showing new work. One artist I work with submitted their portfolio once a year, every year for 4 years. And the first 3 years, the work wasn't quite ready. But the 4th year, it was perfect. That's all for today. Any comments or questions, let me know. I will add the link to my blog post on submitting your work in the description. It is a useful reference, but you should always double check the guidelines on each agency's website because they might change. And feel free to check out some of my other videos.